Welcome to Season 2 of the Shop Stool Podcast, a podcast for woodworkers and the maker community in general. With Joey Chalk from King Post Timberworks, Bryan Cush from Sawdust Bureau, and Robin Lewis from RobinLewisMakes. Hi everyone, I hope you're all very well. This is episode 32, Season 2 of the Shop Stool Podcast. Now, this show is going to be slightly different to our normal lineup. Unfortunately, while recording the last show, we had a bit of technical trouble. So all we were able to salvage was the group Skype call. So you're going to notice the audio quality isn't as up there as it normally is, but the content of this show was incredible. So we still really want to share it with you. It's a very exciting show, and we wanted to get it out no matter what. The person we're talking to is a guy by the name of Damien Wright. He's an award-winning craftsman out of Melbourne. He specialises in eucalypts, and the story of how he gets this particular type of wood is amazing. We'll get to that later in the show. So we're about to get into it now. We've done all of our intros. We started recording from just after that, where Damien's about to explain one of his pieces and what he does. So here we go.
Yeah, some of the pieces that you've put out on Instagram. One of the later ones, it's a picture of it. It's a table with these circles, almost discs, holding it up. Such an incredible design. Where did that come from?
That design was it sort of came out of nowhere. Actually, I was commissioned to design a round table for a gallery in Sydney, a gallery that represents me in Sydney. The gallery Sally Dan Cuthbert, and Sally wanted a round table. She thought that it would really be an interesting thing to have, and like most of my design work, I generally leave it to a very late stage, and as I've done ever since I was a kid and a student, I put myself under that kind of pressure, and I literally was searching around for an idea, and I just sort of happened upon that in my dream. Really, I just kind of thought, oh, that's a good idea, and I'll try that. And I was sort of had a deadline to produce an idea for her, and I actually had already presented her with one idea of a round table that I've done before, and she was very, she didn't want that one, but she was also really good in kind of prompting me to think a little bit looser. Think a little bit more, in more sculpturally in terms of a round table. And so I was kind of trying to find a design that was both functional, because I don't know if you've made round tables, but they're actually really difficult. It's really difficult to get a round table that's both balanced and stable and light, and without kind of having, sort of too much underneath. And also, so yeah, I sort of gave myself a day to come up with an idea, and sketched it once. Did some drawings of that same stack table with squares, stacked on squares, and then made them round, and then sort of did a fairly rough drawing, and was very happy with it. And like most of my design work, the design is also in the making. And actually, this is a really important point, that I don't separate off those two things. It's not a binary. I think that's actually one of the real problems with our creative world, and many of the ways we think within our sort of Western culture about separating the kind of manual realisation of things in general and the intellectual creative processes. I don't actually think that is how my brain works, or it's certainly not how my body works, and I need to have them pushed together. And so I actually allow myself a lot of room to design it while I'm making it. So, that was a sketch, and I did actually publish the pictures of the sketch, and there's one more disc in the actual thing that I made than in the sketch, because the sketch didn't, it wasn't resolved. But I don't punish myself about that. My process is I draw it, then I make a model or a maquette, and to scale, and I work out most of those things in that process. But then I sort of forge ahead, and I really like that part of being a maker, where you are actually problem solving, where it's not It's not well documented. I don't want it to be well documented, and that is both essential to the madness that I have, and utterly infuriating in that I never can kind of nail any of that stuff down for a sort of commercial. I'm always redoing it. It's one of the terrible parts of things that I do. Is not document things properly, but I seem to do it well enough to be able to keep doing it, so it's sort of self-fulfilling.
That's really interesting to me because I'm also essentially almost 100% commission-based work, but I really am envious of what you just described, in that I guess you've done or put yourself in a position where you're working with clients who allow you this freedom. They don't necessarily want to see this black and white sketch of this is exactly what you're going to get. And I've found myself being in that position where for a multitude of reasons, I end up having to do a lot of design work, give clients several different pictures of what they're going to get to scale, and this is exactly what you're going to get, so you can't complain about it. Because if I change something, because often I will find I should change this aspect. Like you say, when you're actually making the thing, you feel like I'm just going to change this because I feel like it needs to be changed. But if I do that and then suddenly the person who's getting it doesn't like that change, then I just lost a whole bunch of my profit. So I think you've got yourself in a position, obviously, where your clients are free and happy for you to be an artist, more so than just a commission-based kind of cabinet shop who's just supplying what someone already has in their head.
Well, I think that you're right. I'm very lucky to have got to that position, but I think there's actually more room and there's more opportunity in that type of practice than we readily accept. In that, I think that like part of that territory is territory that you have to take. Okay, so to do that in terms of the creative process and the business, you have to be prepared to wedge that space in that relationship, that commercial relationship, whether it's with architects or whether it's with builders, and you have to take it away from them. It's not given to you. There's no room in our culture for a craftsman. There's none. It does not exist. Wood craftsmen. There are for other practices, other media, but we've sort of and it's our own making. We made ourselves this sort of reductive, hyper skill based practice where we invested in our own skill set to the exclusion of explaining ourselves to people who are outside of it.
Yeah,
and we're not a building industry. We're not artists. We're craftspeople. And people will respond to that logic. But you have to go into that meeting with your client, and you have to own that. And that can't be with every client. There's plenty of clients where I just follow what they do, and it's a very long journey. Yeah. But it still is that commercial relationship. You have to be the expert. And you have to own all sorts of parts of it, the aesthetic and cultural and political. You have to be able to understand where they're coming from. Yeah. And so you have to be all things to all people. And the payoff of it is that you're poor for a very long time. Yeah. That's the payoff. You might get to do that and make things. So you better be really, really sustained by making really beautiful things, because if you follow that version of it, it's almost impossible to make the equivalent of any kind of structured or salaried wage. You'll get a lot more out of your life in other ways, but it's just not, because you will invest that amount of time. It's your time. That if you're going to do it the way that you want to do it, there's not enough time in the day, in the year to do it like that. So it is hard, and I think you have to be extremely egotistical to do it. You really do have to decide that you're the person who understands this piece of furniture better than anyone else. And once again, that's not, I'm not advertising that for everyone, and I'm not always really happy with that version of myself either. But that person has allowed me to stand in those situations and say, well, no, this is how it's going to be, and this is how it should be, and this is how you want it. And you know, if you can do that, the space is there. There's a space in our culture for a skill-based practitioner with a fantastic material knowledge and a kind of design, and there is space for that, but no one's going to offer it. No, it's just not going to.
So many things you say are resonating there, Damien.
Yeah, I know.
Like the way you're talking about owning it for yourself and creating that niche for yourself. I think it is a cultural thing, especially in Australia, and it's probably from Irish and Scottish roots, is to not shout about your own work. Let other people do it for you. You're supposed to be a modest craftsman. Let the work speak for itself, and hopefully that'll lead to another commission. And I think you're dead right. I think with commission-based woodcraft, you can't do that now. You have to be a one-man marketing machine to really promote your own work. Let it speak for itself. It's obviously got to be a good enough level that you're not just all talk and no end product. But you're absolutely spot on.
I think, Bryan, the technologies have changed, and with social media and Instagram, for instance, as a sort of advertising platform, I think it's there's more opportunity to promote and to pitch yourself than there ever has been before, and I think that's both a enormous burst, but it's also a very difficult burden for particularly emerging craftspeople to have to deal with, because they can present work way farther, at a level that is not resolved, that their practice isn't in that point. They don't have that client base, and so it's you can live a really abstracted existence. And whilst that can be, that's fine if you can kind of push yourself forward and create those jobs and get those projects and all that, and develop from that. I don't think it's a negative thing. But I think self-promotion is also really punishing. And I think at a kind of emotional and psychological level, certainly for me, the isolation of not engaging in the world is actually why I do this. That's why I do it. I don't want to have to talk to people. I don't have to tell people this. I want, as again, to use the ego again, I want people to see the work and to be so, interested and excited that they seek me out, And I have found that making yourself hard to find is not a bad thing. So I sort of agree with you, Bryan, but on the other hand, there is a clientele who want somebody who is, in a way, not in their face, and is not competing for every job, who has got this kind of illusion. And it is all illusion. All that stuff leans much more on a fine art market than it does on, a tradesman or a kind of volume. So, and I've thought about this stuff a lot. I've been doing it for long enough, and it's really hard to. It's really hard to make enough work at the level that you want to make it. So you've got to find people who will invest in that work, and how you do that is really, really, I don't know. I don't really know how you do it.
Sell that secret in your memoirs, Damien. Don't reveal it too soon.
I don't know. You need a bit of luck, but and you need to be able to ride with some really. You got to take on really big things, and you've got to survive them. And I've had situations where I've worked really, really hard, produced fantastic work, and gotten nothing out of it. But to watch the way that people respond to me now, when I talk to clients and the way that they look at a guy in his very early 50s and, who has that track record, I get treated a different way, which is very interesting. It's really interesting. Sorry.
Yes. I was just going to mention that the way you're talking, if I was a client and I had you talking the way you're talking now to me, and myself talking with maybe, if I'm lucky, I don't know, I've been doing this full time for 10 years, I would choose you as my maker, because you've got this self-confident, and I can tell by the way you're speaking that you know what the hell you're talking about. And I know what I'm talking about to a degree, but I can tell that you've got so much more experience than anyone else we've ever talked to.
When did that sort of happen for you, Damien, where you had that moment of, you were talking about producing good work, so you've got the good work to back it up. Whereabouts in your career did you hit that point?
I think that I think fairly early on. So I started doing this in the mid '90s. I sort of started to do it while I was at university, and then kept doing it. But I didn't really. I can tell one anecdote, right? There's one moment where I reckon I found something that really stayed with me, which was I was in my it was in the 90s, and I would have been in my 20s, and I was very interested in, as we've discussed, or we lent on, eucalypts, and very interested in the way that, in the kind of folding, wrapping idea of furniture. A lot of my early stuff had this sort of folding grain and, miters with the grain wrapping around, which I still do. And I was really interested in how to do that in solid timber and eucalypts, in particular ironbark. And so I started to think about how to make that joint, and I, the kind of logic of the day was you can't do that stuff in eucalypts because you can't glue it, and it doesn't respond to this and doesn't respond to that. Anyway, so I went and taught myself how to make blind mitered dovetails, and I can remember making this prototype, which is actually next to me on the floor, of a C section of a little stool, which is just a blind mitered dovetail, two blind mitered dovetails, a top plate and a bottom top plate. If you imagine it probably sits 300 off the floor, and it's got two cantilevered arms sticking out like a long way, like 700, like way out there. And I remember getting one of our little kids when they were just little to stand on it, then getting the bigger one, then getting my wife, then standing on myself, and it worked. Fuck me, it worked. You can make a blind mitered dovetail out of eucalypt that will hold that tension, and it's incredibly strong. And I can remember that was a real moment for me, and I thought, actually, I can do this.
Yeah.
I can picture how that works internally. I can imagine how the joint works, and I did some research, and looked up how you make it, then figured out a way of doing it, and that sort of gave me a degree of confidence. To dream a bit more abstractly in terms of how to make things. But I reckon I actually go back a bit further than that in terms of where it was and where the confidence comes from. And I think that I was gifted that from my parents and my family, and I was always explained in our household as being linked to the other men particularly my father's side, who were makers. They were all engineers and shipwrights, and that was a sort of, from a very young age, that I located myself there as a very vocal, very political, very cerebral, family, and I always found solace, in the shed and making stuff, and I made and made and made. And I was gently rewarded for that always. And so I think I decided that I was going to be this guy a very long time ago. And how I managed to convince other people to pay me money to do stuff, I still don't know. I can think, fuck me, how'd that happen? Especially when you go and see your old work. I hope you can publish the swearing or not, but I'll stop. especially when I go and look at old work sometimes, and I look at things that I've done, and I don't even know that guy. I look at it and go, "Jeez, that's good. Gee, I wish I did that." But so somehow I've managed to construct it, and it has been, it's a mystery to me.
I must say, it does. That feels really good. It's happened to me once where I've gone back and seen a piece of furniture that I made. I forgot that I made, essentially, kind of, just passes you by. And I saw it, I recognized it, and I had a look at it, and I was kind of impressed that I made it the way I did. I was like, oh, wow, that's good. I'm glad I took the time to do it the right way, even though I probably thought about it then, but maybe I would have cut a corner now, but I did it the right way, and I'm happy. I'm glad that I did that. It's a good feeling when you see something that is done the way it should be, and you took the time to do it.
Well, I can remember seeing a chair when I was at uni studying. I did a Bachelor of Arts, and I saw a chair, and it was a Victorian Woodworkers Association exhibition in the old exhibition buildings, and I would have been in my late teens or early 20s. I was at university, and I saw this chair, and I looked at the control in it, the hand control, and I knew that I wanted to do that, and I still couldn't make that chair. I think it might have been I'm not sure, but it might have been a Tony Kellaway chair. But I can't locate who it was. But it was of that kind of nature. It was beautiful and resolved and curved and sumptuous, and I still couldn't do that. And I did know from a very young age that I wanted to get control of my mind and my body and somehow bring them together. And that's that's the life journey for me, is to sort of find that balance between, dreaming up things and problem solving and making mistakes, and trying not to make those mistakes, and trying to stay ahead of the hammer, as a resolution tool, and try and stay ahead of that without drowning the thing in process and without drowning it in drawings or jigs or repeatability. Like, I want to be all over it, but I don't want to be smashing, tendons together with a mallet to make them fit. But I also don't want to, and sorry, Carbotech or whoever, I don't want a Panto router or I don't want one. Like, I want to figure that shit out, and I want to make it, and but I don't want to end up having to bash the crap out of it to fit together. Or cut myself, I don't want that, all that self-loathing that comes from failure and injury. I reckon this is what I do to try and test that, constantly test that.
You said you mentioned earlier about constantly wanting to push yourself forward and take on new things. What is that? What form does that take for you at the moment? What's a new thing that you could be slightly apprehensive about?
Scale. There's a sort of point at which that I'm at the moment where what I've done on a sort of one-off commission-based practice scale has kind of flirted with domestic into the commercial, and I've done a couple of really successful larger commissions, and there's a kind of a creative process there where you're collaborating with designers, and you're sort of intersecting that world, but you are also really vulnerable because you're not a massive joinery with a huge insurance policy and staff to go through the contract, and can you actually take this type of model where people see the outcome, the client sees the outcome, the designer sees the outcome, but can they have you? Can you kind of wedge enough space contractually in that world to get what they want and deliver what you want, without becoming a massive joiner. And I've got nothing but respect for massive joineries, but I can't do that. I can't. So that's a challenge I'm in at the moment. I'm actually in that position where I've been, I've got a job. It's a really, really good job for really interesting people, all these people I value, and I will make that happen. But, there's a lot of energy to go into the sort of structure of that, like how to be that guy that you were talking about, Robin, like how do I be that guy when you're building, when you're one of, all these other people in a massive commercial building thing. You got to walk in with your beret on and, be the wood guy, Yeah. And if they let you be that guy, you'll deliver like they've got no idea, like there's a huge vacuum there because the kind of the product that people are used to is, you and I, we all know it. It's pretty standard. Yeah. Whereas you can produce something else. Well, but there's a lot of moving of bollards to, give you the space to do that. And that is really challenging, let alone doing the actual work, actually physically doing the work and doing the design work. But I'm around really good people and really good designers and designers who want to collaborate and who want to see the sort of, the intersection of the practices rather than these things as polar opposites, and that see you as a contributor and a collaborator in the design process. So that, that's the big thing, is winning that argument, win that argument that the best way to do this is to sort of compress that design as opposed, unlike your training as an architect, Brian, to kind of in a way invert that and, compress all those things back together rather than have them separate out. But you got it. There's a lot of emotional energy to keep people on board with that idea. And if you fuck it up, you're gone. So you got to not stuff it up.
Like, to me, Damien, I've obviously known your work for a long time, and I've known you for a good few years now and been fortunate enough to exhibit my work alongside yours. But I remember the first time I saw a piece of your work in person was at the Australian Furniture Design Awards, where you had the Balagal Lily.
Yep.
Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
And it just struck me then, well, it was probably been with me for a while, but hearing you talk about it was the way you can merge a beautiful aesthetic and 3D form and a piece of furniture, but you embody it with the poetic side of things as well. And it's not just a piece of furniture, but it's something that tells a story. Could you talk us through, because some of the listeners might not have seen it, but they should definitely Google some images of it. And could you talk us through how that commission happened, who it was with collaboratively, and yeah,
I'd love to. But can I get a beer? I'm just going to grab a beer.
Yeah, grab a beer. We'll talk amongst ourselves.
Yeah.
It's quite funny listening to what Damien was saying earlier about not going the jig route, because Joey, we've talked about this in the past. I think we just touched on it very briefly, where you're making a piece as a solo woodworker. There is only that piece. There is no other piece. So the idea of making it perfect and repeatable, that shouldn't be the point. You want to have an angle that isn't 90 degrees on one corner of the table, because that's your piece. That's your quote unquote mistake, and only that piece has that. So it's a cool way to look at it.
Yeah, I think whenever anyone's asked me to make more than one of anything, I've always just kind of shied away, because I don't want to have to. The perfect example is a while ago I finished a set of 12 chairs that I was going on about with you guys, and I talked about that all the jigs I had made to make those 12 chairs have been destroyed in the making of the chairs. Yeah. But that's fine, because I never want to make those 12 chairs again. If someone wants me to make 12 chairs even similar to those, I'll make it all from scratch. I'll make new templates, and they'll all be slightly different. I don't want to be able to just grab the jig off the wall and throw 12 chairs together in 3 days.
It sounds so nonsensical when you say it out loud. Like, anybody that doesn't make stuff would be listening to this going, what?
It's bonkers. Yeah.
But I know exactly where you're coming from.
It's strange. I don't even know why. I don't think I've sat and thought about why that is. because I know from my business point of view, it's like, why the hell don't I just spend a week making these jigs up, and then I can just sell these chairs to whoever wants them? But then I just become a manufacturer, and I don't want to do that. I really want to stay on that. Like Damien was saying, there's this, you're walking this tightrope of design, artist, woodworker, businessman, and on any given day, you're all of those things from hour to hour.
All right, let's hear this commission story. I'm fascinated.
Yeah. But I do like talking about chairs, Robin. Yeah, chairs are you don't want to make them again because they're mad. It's mad. It's just, just madness. There's nothing that we do that lends itself more to industrialisation than a chair, and there's nothing that we do that suffers more from repetition and industrialisation. Like the difference between a handmade chair and a chair that's one of millions or thousands is just, it's the difference in between a live body and a dead body. It's just different. And if you can't see that, then don't do it.
Yeah.
And but it's
I like that.
But you certainly can't make any money out of it.
No.
It's impossible. So it's like
Cheers is, I think, is just purely. I would have only said this after listening to you, Damon. It's all ego.
All ego.
Cheers is just ego, and just to say you've done it.
Yeah.
There's no money in the bank.
I've made hundreds of chairs, and I've never finished one of them. And they're never finished. You never, ever.
Yeah.
Like, you can always look at it and go, oh, okay. It just never. Anyway. But I always say, when I finish chairs, I always say to my wife, I'm never doing that again. And she always says, yes. Yeah, I'll bet. Anyway, so Balaga Lily is translates in Yungal Mata. So Yungal are a people of northeast Arnhem Land, and Yungal Mata is their language, and massive oversimplification. And please forgive me for the reductive explanation, and that's not because I've got a more complex explanation. That's because I'm struggling to keep up with such a complex thing, culture and people. But Balagalili means two ways learning, and it's a concept that I was introduced to when I was lucky enough to live on a Aboriginal community in northeast Arnhem Land called Gunyangara. I was invited up there to set up a workshop, and we moved the whole family up there, and we lived up there. And I did set up this workshop, and
how long were you there for, Damien? Sorry.
I was there for about 8 months. The whole family there for 6 months. But we're still going backwards and forwards, and I haven't been up there for a while. But Claire goes up a lot more than me. And the concept was presented to me very early on by the old men and the people the young men that I was working with, that the whole way that this process would work would be an exchange. It was not I wasn't the teacher, and nor was I the student. That the two things were again compressed. You don't separate these things out. And that I was the last thing I was there to do was to go up there and teach these fellas, just how it is. This is all, I know all this and you don't know. And that I was to go in with my eyes and my heart wide open, and I certainly did. And Balagalili was a way of expressing the cross-cultural, permeable frontier of white and black culture. We're Yungal and Ballanda. We're Ballanda. And so when we came back to Melbourne, heartbroken because, eventually you have to leave a situation like that. And we were sort of extremely devastated. But I had a very special relationship with one of the men in particular, a fella called Bunala Yunapingu. And Bunala was the Yungal mentor in the workshop. And he and I, although we had our trials and tribulations, he and I got along very well, and he's a magnificent human being, complicated, like it can be difficult, but he's beautiful and he's powerful and he's soulful and one of the most interesting men I've ever met in my life. And the moment I met him, I was just sort of fascinated by this guy. And so I started to bring Bunala down to work with me down here, and just to come down for 2 or 3 week stints at a time, a couple of times a year. He'd stay with us because we are family. It's a kinship. There's a kinship relationship there. And we'd work together, and he'd largely work for me or just do whatever we're doing. And it was was nearly 10 years, maybe 8 years down that path where we started to sort of talk about not having a kind of relationship where I was the boss and he was a worker with me, but that would have a collaborative relationship. So we started this conversation about collaboration a long time before it actually happened. And when we finally sort of started to get this project up and running, was actually specifically for an exhibition curated by Alkiston Gallery, which was called, it was about the extractive frontier, and it was about artists' response to Australia as a place of mining, basically, and that whole kind of cultural imperative we have of dig it up, And Gove, where Bunala is from, northeast Arnhem Land, has a huge bauxite mine there, and that's the sort of the big white industry. And so we were in a very good place to talk about the extractive frontier. And so what happened was Bunala came down and he stayed with us for about a month, and we talked and tried to figure out what we would do. And out of that came a kind of a very difficult realisation about cross-cultural collaboration that is really about the power of a collective idea and a movement, but the separate body, that the white guy, the Ballender guy, and the Yolngu man, in a way that they can be bound together through all sorts of things, even kinship, but in another way they are always separate. That you're not, I don't want to be and can't be a Yolngu man. I'm not going to be, and I don't want to turn Bunala into a industrial, like a industrial worker like us. He's got a traditional life, he's got a cultural life, he's got a whole life that's outside of that. And so we sort of designed this piece around two forms. One was the form of him throwing a spear, which is a kind of act of power and grace and athleticism, and it's sort of loaded. It's full of sort of anticipation, and that piece is called Wunakali, which means the other side. So it's a sort of act of looking, which was also a joke that we had up there, but about all sorts of things anyway. And so that's a beautiful sort of loaded piece, and then the other piece is a tower, which is it's actually in ancient Redgum, so it's made out of a 10,000-year-old Redgum with all those references to the age of this continent and obviously the people of this continent. But that piece is rectilinear, Roman, divisible. It's entirely Western, and it's sort of, so it's a way of kind of, the piece is about the tension between two men moving through life together with a connection and a purpose, but an acknowledgement that you may always occupy. You can love each other within the same space without destroying each other.
Yeah, that's
wow.
Awesome.
That's amazing.
I can listen to that all night. I'm instantly around a campfire with a beer listening to that.
Oh no. You would be the best person to sit around a campfire with, Damien.
With Bunala's better. Bunala's a Yunapingu, and he is a star. He's like and he's a great man to be around a campfire with, and he can regale you with story after story after story. It's a very performative culture. It's a fascinating culture, and any chance that you get to get involved in it, I think it's an essential thing. It's a gift that this country is yet to fully realise, and it's Aboriginal heritage. I mean, we flirt with it, we talk about it, but it's actually, it's there, and my argument about, or my feeling about that is that as bad as our first 200 years have been in terms of a colonial project and the savagery that we wrought on Indigenous people, that those Indigenous people have prevailed, and that our culture in the next 200 years will reflect that, and we won't be some sort of offcut of British colonial overreach that is forever trying to prove that it actually isn't where it is. That we actually wish we're closer or we're somewhere else. We'll actually own up to the fact that we're here, and it's in the Southern Hemisphere, and it's an Aboriginal place, and that will be our defining logic. That we won't continue to compartmentalise that and push it to the side and say this is the problem, this is something we have to deal with. But to do that, we have to, we have to embrace justice, and we haven't. We don't. We just won't talk about it as a country. We won't acknowledge we'll barely acknowledge the disgraceful history, and we're nowhere near having a conversation about justice or reconciliation without basically getting squeamish and deciding that it's all too difficult, and and we'll always be in this kind of half-hearted myopia. We'll be stuck here because fucking Europe's not going to look after us. America's not going to look after us. Like, we're too far. We can't be those people anymore. And maybe this COVID, maybe the fact that we're going back to isolationism, maybe that'll turn us back in on ourselves, and we'll actually go, well, actually, this is the most fascinating and engrossing place to be, and we can actually build something rather than go, well, I've got two pennies. The first thing I'm going to do is get the hell out of here and get myself to somewhere where there's real life. Milan, there's furniture in Milan. You hear that? There's furniture. There's furniture. Those guys know about furniture, those guys in Milan. Maybe we'll go, well, actually, you know what? There's furniture here. There's been people working with wood in this country for 65, 80,000 years? But no, they wouldn't know anything, those blokes, would they? They wouldn't have a clue. They wouldn't know anything. I think I'll go and ask someone in Milan.
Does it upset you? Does it upset you, Damien, that more Australian makers don't use solely Australian timbers?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't upset me. It fascinates me. In fact, it fascinates me that we no, it doesn't upset me. I think it's funny. I think it's funny.
It confuses the hell out of me.
Yeah, it is confusing. That we've chased something that we can't possibly have. That's like why would you? I don't know. Why would you? Like, it's like wanting to be a teenager or something. You just can't. You're not going to be young forever. Like, why would you be focused all that effort on stuff that comes from? Like, I'm going to get my Tesla to drive to the wood shop to buy my American oak. The American oaks come out here on the ship with the burning, dirty oil. Like there's trees around us, and wouldn't you use those and save your money? And it's not so much. I don't get it. I don't get it. I don't get the aesthetic fascination with the North. I was very much, and this is my parents. My parents were, nationalists and they're socialists, and they totally sort of drummed into us that this is where you're at. This is the place. And we had what would seem normal at the time, but it was a very adventurous childhood, and my parents were utterly fascinated by this country and the land, and they're very much of it, and they brought us up to have that feeling too. And so I've always thought that the materials of this country are a way of understanding it and exploring it. And I can see why everyone wants to work with, within the canon of, Northern Hemisphere. I can see it in one way, but I just don't think it's the most interesting game.
Damien, and all of you guys, actually. So I'm over in New Zealand, and So can you clarify, because from my point of view, working with native timbers is kind of taboo because like it's illegal to mill it, fell it. You can't get it. If you can find someone with a log of it, it's worth more than American walnut anyway, and it's just glorified pine. And so why would you spend it on it? And so is it actually are Australian hardwoods like readily available in all these sorts of timbers that you guys are using?
Do you want to go, Brian?
I was just going to say it's a massively loaded political question at the minute.
Okay.
Especially in Victoria, they're trying to propose banning the logging of native timbers by 2022, I think it is, or 2023, like not very far away. And it's all to do with not meeting certification standards. Right. It's tied to businesses like the large, big hardware store that I'm not going to name that is in every single city in Australia. That one, the big green with the red writing that Karen had her shout in. It's to do with certification and lots of money. Like the reality is there are incredibly slow-growing native species of timber which do need some kind of protection levels, and they do need to be managed in terms of the cost of the timber. It needs to reflect how long it takes to grow it. Whereas there's some incredibly fast-growing eucalypt species, and the idea is if you stop logging native species and you're just going to switch and import either cheap pine as building material or try to import, your hardwoods are going to be replaced with American oak, and it's nonsensical. And all the experts that I've spoken to that run timber yards they don't understand the logic behind it, and it's just being driven by big business. There are it's very different from New Zealand, as you say, because the majority of native species in New Zealand are varieties of pine which look beautiful but they don't hold up terribly well, and they're incredibly expensive. Whereas you go and you get some Victorian ash or Tasmanian oak or something, it'll do the job and it's affordable. But you compare that with some of the stuff that Damien works with, I wouldn't know where to start on a piece of 10,000 year old. So
I was just going to say,
I think I'd stare at it for about
of that big
2 weeks before I was of the level where I'd touch it.
Damien, is that stuff like gold to find, to source, and to work with?
Yeah, it is, and I just to go back a step, I think that the thing that we in some ways as furniture makers, woodworkers, have been lumped into the industrial arguments about forestry, and that the kind of volume of timber that you would use in a practice like mine, and I suspect all of yours, is never going to make an impact on this kind of scale. And I think that that the sort of large scale industrial arguments about forestry and timber and supply and control are really, really problematic, and as Brian says, quite polluted. And I choose to stay right out of it. I don't trust any of their certifications. It means nothing to me. An ink stamp on something.
The best thing you can do, Damien, which is what you do, is just don't make shit from it.
That's right. Don't make shit from it.
You're going to use a real piece of wood that used to be a living thing that's cut down and had a negative effect on the environment. Make something positive out of it. Make something that's going to last for 50, 100, 200 years. Don't make something that's going to end up in landfill in 5 years. That's
exactly. And I think we're really, really well placed in our culture to have that conversation and to be those people, because woodworkers, you have to use an organism. You have to be about the sort of death in one form of that organism and the transference into something else, and it's all about taking responsibility for that. And there's a legacy of that conversation, that argument in fine woodworking, And we should be more invited into that conversation. We got something to say. And the whole scale of the practices that you know and I know, and what people want to do with them and their ambitions and their whole, it's a really, really tuned in, solid approach to life. That's more relevant than it has been for a long time. And we need to sort of, in a way, claim it. But that, we're into it. Like, we are into the sustainable use of and high value of a material. That's what woodworkers do. And we don't, you're not going to argue with wood pulpers and that big green hardware shop. You're not going to, they're not going to care. But we actually have something, and it's a really essential conversation. Anyway, ancient redgum is redgum that's been buried since the last ice age. So at the end of the last ice age, which ends about sort of 13,000 years ago, and you have enormous melts off the snowy mountains here, which were glacial, and they flood the Murray-Darling Basin, and they bowl over forests, and trees fall in and get buried and silted over. And so they're redgum trees that have they're very specific conditions, and it goes through a process where it oxidizes and turns jet black right through the whole log. And the logs that I use, the timber that I use, comes out of a quarry up on the border, up on in Albury-Wodonga, and it was a quarry that mined road rock, like an aggregate, to put into asphalt under roads. And I got involved in it in the 90s, and sort of when the people who started the business, Joan Bowler and Anatole Farrell and Jim Bowler, when they started it, I got involved with them then, making, doing research and, experimenting and teaching myself how to work with it. And then over the years, their business interest waned, and I stayed with the miller, who is a fellow called Kelvin Barton, who's passed away. And for a long time, I would source all of my ancient redgum from Kelvin. And when he passed away, I bought what he had.
Awesome.
So I went out on a limb and did that, and so now I'm kind of working through that material. And it is both an incredible privilege to work with something that's so rare and so meaningful. And I do think it's a meaningful material. I think it's got a really, really strong spirit. And I think it's something that engages us in a level of conversation, or has the power to engage us in a level of conversation that we have done as settlers, done everything we can to not have. We've done we've worked as hard as we possibly can to not talk about this shit. Yeah. But you make something out of something that's 10,000 years old, and it's jet black, and you're as white as the driven snow, you're going to have, someone's going to ask the question, where are you in all this? What does it mean? And I'm all answers and all ears. But so I think it really encapsulates the primary argument that I've had in my practice from the start, which is that making things out of timber is essentially still part of that colonial project. That the first thing you do as an invader is you get your axe and you start chopping down trees. It's the very first thing you do. And it's the technology that you bring that brings you here. It's the craft and the materials that get you, and your guns and your steel and your military to another place to conquer another people. How you do that is you make a vessel out of wood that can float across space with nothing. Like that. Imagine the technology. Imagine what those guys could do. Yeah. To make a machine out of wood that can flex and twist and navigate seas that you've got it's like, so that's your primary technology. Then once you land, you take that technology and you go, well, what am I going to do next? I'm just going to start cutting down trees, aren't I? Because that's what we do. We build, and you start cutting down trees, and that is your first moment. you get your axe and you hit an ironbark and you go, what the fuck have we got here? All that green, all that, you saw it sailing up the east coast of Australia. It says green, 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 you know, and then you get off and what have you got? You've got, it's the hardest, densest, it just does nothing, you know. So you figure out a technique to build a slab hut, and that's it. But you've gone from building boats,
Yeah.
you know, that could sail the world, to building a slab hut that can't keep out the water. It can barely stand up because you can't. Your technology doesn't work.
Yeah, right.
So we're still in that game. We're still doing it. We're still, as colonists, we're still figuring out how we can realise our, you know, how we see the world, what we want out of the world with the materials that are around us. And once you put ancient Redgum in it, with its jet black, with its whole conversation about age and time and a habitated continent that's, you know, that's older than we can possibly get our head around with, it just explodes that conversation into a much more complicated, and I hope, you know, much more, you know, fertile conversation about what design can do, about what craft can do, about what materials can do, and about the whole process of colonisation. And meanwhile, I just try to not cut my fingers off.
Oh, wow.
I was going to say, on that very poetic note, we're going to have to call the show to an end, but I think that's a perfect place to leave it on that thought. I really like that.
That's the best end of a show we've ever had.
Yeah.
Yeah. Perfect. All right. So to everyone listening, I hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, please go ahead and give it a rating on iTunes. That really does help us out. The Shop Stool Podcast is available on iTunes and most other podcast apps. My name is Robin Lewis. Joey and Brian, thanks for hanging out today. Damien, thank you once again. I think we might get you on the show again for a part 2 to hear some more of these stories, because
That's awesome.
It's been amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Really cool.
Thank you very much for having me. And it's a pleasure. And keep making.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
The future is handmade.
Awesome. Love it. Love it. Every line is just a catchphrase for the show.
Every line's
Incredible.
a t-shirt.
Yeah. All right.
All right,
See
everyone.
you later.
Take care. See ya.
See you guys.